The night before my wedding, I opened my mother's bedroom door and my fiancé was in her bed. Let that sink in for a second. Not a stranger. Not some random mistake. My fiancé, my mother's bed. And somehow, that wasn't even the worst part. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. My name is Elena Cross, and at the time, I was 22 years old, just a few hours away from what I thought was the most important day of my life. The dress was already hanging in my closet. The venue was booked. 200 guests were flying in. Everything was perfect. At least, that's what I kept telling myself. Have you ever had that feeling where everything looks right, but something underneath just feels off? That was me. For weeks. I blamed it on stress, wedding nerves, our pressure. That's what everyone says, right? But now I know. It wasn't nerves. It was something trying to warn me. I had moved back into my childhood home temporarily for the wedding. It felt strange at first, being back in that same hallway, those same rooms, but it made sense. My mom insisted. Victoria Cross, 45, elegant, controlled, the kind of woman people listen to without question. She handled everything, the venue, the seating chart, even my guest list. At the time, I thought she was just being supportive. Now, I see it differently. And then there was Daniel Hayes, 27, my fiancé, stable, calm, the kind of man who made everyone feel safe. My friends adored him, my family trusted him, and my mom? She didn't just like him. She approved of him in a way that felt almost too strong. But again, I ignored it. And because when you're about to get married, you don't go looking for problems. You bury them. Earlier that day, something small happened. So small I almost forgot it. I walked into the kitchen unexpectedly and saw Daniel and my mom standing close together, talking quietly. Too quietly. They stopped the second they saw me. You know that kind of silence? The kind that drops too fast? Yeah, that one. I laughed it off. Am I interrupting something? My mom smiled, smooth, effortless. Daniel looked normal. Just wedding stuff, he said. And I believed him, because why wouldn't I? That night, the house finally went quiet. Guests had left, decorations were set, everything was ready. All that was left was sleep. Except I couldn't. I kept staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. What if something goes wrong tomorrow? Wait, what if I trip walking down the aisle? What if... Then I heard it. A sound. Soft. A shift. A footstep. Maybe a voice. At first I thought I imagined it, but then I heard it again, coming from down the hall, from my mother's room. I sat up. My heart started beating faster, but not from fear, from confusion. Why would she still be awake? And then another thought crossed my mind. What if Daniel came over? Maybe he wanted to surprise me. Something romantic. Something sweet. Right? I stepped out into the hallway. The floor was cold under my feet. The house felt different, too quiet, too still, like it was holding its breath. The light from my mom's bedroom was faint but visible. The door wasn't fully closed, just slightly open. Every step I took felt heavier than the last. And I don't know why, but something inside me started whispering, "Don't open that door." But I did. Of course I did. I pushed it open slowly. And there he was, Daniel, in my mother's bed. Everything inside me snapped into place and broke at the same time. My chest tightened, my vision blurred. I didn't think. I reacted. I stepped forward, ready to scream. But then, he looked at me. Calm, too calm. No panic, no guilt, no scrambling to explain, just steady eye contact. And then he said something that didn't fit the moment at all, not even close. He said, "I was going to tell you. Tell me." What? And that's when I realized whatever I had just walked into wasn't what I thought it was. And somehow, that made it worse. So, why didn't I scream? That's the question, right? Because if you walked in on your fiancé in your mother's bed, the night before your wedding, you'd lose it. Anyone would, but I didn't. Because something about that moment didn't feel like what it should have been. I was standing there, frozen, my hand still gripping the edge of the door, My heart was racing, but my body wouldn't move. Because the scene in front of me didn't match the story my brain was trying to tell. There was no scrambling, no panic, no, this isn't what it looks like, just stillness, controlled, quiet, almost prepared. My mom, Victoria, was sitting upright on the edge of the bed. Not hiding, not flustered, just sitting there, her back straight, her face unreadable. And Daniel, he didn't even get up. He just looked at me like he'd been expecting this moment. Say something, I finally managed. And my voice didn't sound like mine. It was thinner, sharper. Explain this, right now. There was a pause, a long one. The kind that stretches just enough to make your stomach drop. Daniel exhaled slowly, like he had rehearsed this. We didn't want you to find out like this. We. That word hit harder than anything else. Not I, not she. We. My eyes snapped to my mom. She still wouldn't look at me. That's when something inside me shifted. Because this didn't feel like betrayal anymore. It felt like coordination. What is this? I asked again, louder this time. No answer. Are you two? I stopped myself. Even saying it felt wrong, because the energy in the room didn't match that accusation. There was no tension between them, no urgency. It wasn't messy. It was structured. Daniel finally sat up slightly, near resting his elbows on his knees. Elena, he said carefully, you deserve to know the truth. I let out a short, hollow laugh. Oh, now I do? Still, no reaction from my mom. That was new. My entire life, she always had something to say, something to control, something to fix. But now, silence. And that silence started to scare me more than anything else. I took a step closer into the room, then another. My eyes scanned everything without meaning to. The bed, the nightstand, the lamp. Everything looked normal, too normal. And then it hit me. If this was cheating, it would feel chaotic. But it didn't. It felt deliberate. Look at me, I said to my mom. She didn't. Mom, nothing. Look at me. Finally, slowly, she lifted her gaze. And what I saw there wasn't guilt, wasn't shame. It was something colder and something calculated. It didn't start the way you think, she said quietly. My stomach dropped. Because that sentence, that wasn't denial. That was a setup. I shook my head, backing up slightly. No, you don't get to say that like this is some misunderstanding. Daniel stood up now, but still calm, still controlled. That's exactly why we need to explain it properly. Explain what? There is no version of this that makes sense. There is no explanation that fixes this. Unless this wasn't what it looked like at all. And that thought, that was worse. I crossed my arms tightly, trying to hold myself together. Then explain it, I said. Because right now, I'm about 5 seconds away from walking out that door and canceling everything. Another pause, another glance, this time between the two of them. And that's when I saw it. A silent understanding, like they'd already had this conversation before. Without me. Daniel nodded slightly, then looked back at me and said, we need to start from the beginning. My chest tightened because something about the way he said that made it clear. This didn't start recently. This didn't start tonight. This started long before me. And suddenly, I wasn't sure if I'd ever actually been part of my own relationship. What do you mean, the beginning? That was the first thing I said, but even as the words left my mouth, I felt it. That slow, sinking realization that whatever they were about to tell me was going to rewrite everything. Daniel didn't answer right away. Of course he didn't. He glanced at my mother, again, and she gave the smallest nod. Say like she was giving him permission. That alone made my chest tighten. Why did he need her approval? I met your mom before I met you, Daniel finally said. Silence. Not dramatic silence. Not explosive. Just empty. Like the air had been pulled out of the room. I blinked. Once. Twice. Trying to process something that didn't make sense. That's not possible, I said automatically. because in my memory, I introduced them. At least, that's what I thought. My mom folded her hands in her lap. Calm, composed. It was a few months before, she said. A few months? A few months. I let out a short breath, shaking my head. Okay, so what? You met him first. That doesn't explain this. I gestured at the bed, the room, the entire situation, because none of that justified what I had just walked into. Mom, it wasn't random, Daniel said. And there it was. Another sentence that didn't belong. What does that mean? I asked, sharper now. My patience was gone. My confusion was turning into something else, something heavier. My mom finally stood up, slowly, like she was stepping into a role she'd been avoiding. I introduced you to him on purpose. That sentence didn't hit all at once. It crept in, slow, quiet, and then it landed. You. What? I thought he would be a good match for you, she continued, still calm, still measured, too measured. I stared at her, waiting for the rest, because that couldn't be it. That couldn't possibly explain anything. And I pushed. Another pause. God, I was starting to hate those. Daniel ran a hand through his hair. We stayed in contact, he admitted. My stomach dropped. During our relationship? He didn't answer. He didn't have to. I let out a laugh, but there was no humor in it. So, let me get this straight. You knew each other before me, you set us up, and then you kept talking behind my back? It wasn't like that, my mom said quickly. I turned to her. Then what was it like? She opened her mouth, closed it. For the first time that night, she hesitated. And that hesitation? That was everything, because my mother never hesitated. I stepped closer, my voice dropping. How long? Daniel answered this time. The entire time. That felt like a punch. Not loud, not explosive, just direct. The entire time. Every date, every conversation, every moment I thought was mine. Wasn't. I shook my head slowly. No, that doesn't make sense. Because it didn't. Even manipulation has a motive, even betrayal has a reason, and I still didn't have one. Why? I asked. That one word carried everything. Another silence. But this one was different, heavier, like we were getting closer to something they didn't want to say. I looked between them, and that's when I noticed it. The nightstand, papers, neatly stacked, out of place. Something about them pulled my attention instantly, because they didn't belong in a moment like this. What is that? I asked, pointing. No, Elena, wait, Daniel started, too late. I moved quickly, stepping past him and grabbing the papers before either of them could stop me. They weren't random. They weren't notes. They were official, printed, structured, legal. My eyes scanned the first page, and then everything inside me went cold. Because right there, at the top of the document, was my name, Elena Cross. And underneath it, language I didn't fully understand yet. But I knew one thing instantly. This wasn't about love. I looked up slowly, my hands tightening around the papers. What is this? And for the first time that night, Daniel didn't have a calm answer. What is this? I remember how my voice sounded in that moment, low, controlled, which was strange because inside everything was unraveling. The paper in my hands felt heavier than it should have. Just ink, just pages. But somehow, it felt like proof of something I hadn't fully understood yet. Daniel stepped toward me carefully, like approaching something fragile. Elena, just give me a second to explain. No, I said immediately. I pulled the papers closer to me. You've had plenty of seconds. Start talking. My eyes dropped back to the page. Legal language, dense paragraphs. But certain words stood out. Marriage clause, asset transfer, primary beneficiary. My heart skipped, then started beating faster. What is this? I asked again, sharper this time. My mom finally answered, It's tied to your father's estate. Everything stopped. My dad's? That hadn't been part of this, not in my mind, not in any version of this situation. I flipped to the next page, and there it was. Clearer now, simpler, a condition. My father's estate, Everything he left behind was structured in a way I had never fully questioned. Because I trusted her. I trusted my mom to handle it. But now, reading it myself, I saw what I had missed. The full inheritance would only transfer completely under one condition: marriage before the age of 23. I froze. A slow, creeping realization began to form. Unwanted, unavoidable. I looked up. From the papers, to Daniel, to my mother. "You knew about this," I said. Not a question. My mom didn't deny it. Of course she didn't. "And you?" I turned to Daniel, my voice tightening. "You knew too." A pause, then a quiet, "Yes." That word echoed louder than anything else that night. I let out a breath that didn't feel like enough. "So what? This whole thing?" I gestured between us. "The relationship, the engagement, the wedding tomorrow." Neither of them interrupted. "Was it planned?" Daniel closed his eyes briefly, like he was bracing himself. "Yes." There it was. Simple, direct, final. And something inside me shifted permanently in that moment. Not shattered, not exploded. Just changed. I nodded slowly, processing, rebuilding the timeline in my head. "You met him," I said to my mom. "You knew about the inheritance clause." Another nod. "And you brought him into my life." Silence, but it was confirmation. "For the money." This time she spoke. "It wasn't just about money." I almost laughed. Almost. "Then what was it about?" I asked. Her answer came quickly, too quickly. "Security." I stared at her. Because that word didn't belong in this moment. "For who?" I asked quietly. She didn't answer, and she didn't need to. I looked back at Daniel. "And you agreed to this?" "At first." "Yes." At first. That small detail tried to soften the blow. It didn't. He stepped closer. I didn't expect things to change." "Change?" I repeated. His voice lowered. "I didn't expect to actually care about you." There it was, the part that was supposed to mean something, but it didn't land. Not anymore. Because every memory I had was now split in two. What I thought was real, and what was arranged. I looked back down at the papers, then at the date, tomorrow. Everything was lined up perfectly. The wedding, the clause, the transfer. "You were going to wait," I said slowly. My mom nodded. "Until after the wedding." Another nod. "So that was the plan. Let me walk down the aisle, say yes, sign everything, smile for the photos, and only then, maybe, tell me the truth, or maybe not at all." I felt something cold settle in my chest. Not panic, not heartbreak. Something sharper, clearer. "I'm understanding." I folded the papers slowly, carefully, and then I looked at both of them. Really looked. At the man I was supposed to marry, and the woman who raised me. And I realized something that hit harder than everything else combined. Tomorrow was never about love. It was a transaction, and I was the center of it. So what now? That was the question hanging in the room. Not dramatic, not shouted, just inevitable. I stood there, the papers still in my hands, looking at the two people who had quietly rewritten my entire life. My mother, my fiancé, or not my fiancé, not anymore. For a moment, nobody spoke. Because what was left to say? The truth was already sitting between us. Clear, cold, complete. My mom was the first to try. "Elena," she said softer now, you need to understand. This was about protecting your future." I let out a slow breath, and for the first time that night, I felt calm. Not confused, not overwhelmed, just clear. "No," I said. My voice didn't shake. "This was about controlling it." That landed. I saw it in her face. A crack. Small, but real. Daniel stepped forward again. "Elena, listen to me. It wasn't supposed to stay like that." I looked at him, really looked at him, trying to find something familiar, something real. "And when exactly were you going to tell me?" I asked. He hesitated. That was all the answer I needed. "After," I continued, "after the wedding, after everything was signed?" No response. I nodded once. "Right. Because of course." By then, it wouldn't matter. The condition would be fulfilled, the money transferred, and the plan complete. I placed the papers back down on the nightstand, carefully, like they were something fragile, even though they weren't. Then I took a step back, toward the door. Elna, my mom started. No, I said again, and this time there was no room for negotiation. I'm not getting married tomorrow. Silence. Daniel's face changed first, not panic, but something close, like a calculation suddenly collapsing. You don't mean that, he said. I held his gaze. I do. My mom stepped forward now. You can't just cancel everything. Do you understand what that means? I did. Oh, I did. 200 guests, non-refundable deposits, questions, rumors, judgment. But none of that felt heavier than what I had just learned. I understand exactly what it means, I said, and I'm still not doing it. That was it. On decision made. No drama, no screaming, just final, immediate fallout. The next few hours were a blur. Phone calls, messages, confusion spreading faster than explanations. By morning, the wedding was officially canceled. Guests were informed with vague statements. Unexpected circumstances, personal matters. But people talk. They always do. It didn't take long before the story started shifting, twisting, spreading. Not the full truth, but enough. Some blamed Daniel, some blamed me, some even defended my mother. But I didn't correct anyone, because the truth wasn't something I owed the public. The consequences I moved out within a week. Not dramatically, not angrily, just permanently. My relationship with my mom, gone. Not explosive, not loud, just severed. Daniel tried reaching out, calls, my messages, long explanations. I didn't respond, because there was nothing left to clarify. Legally, things got complicated, very quickly. I met with a lawyer, reviewed everything, every clause, every condition. And what I found confirmed it all. What they planned wasn't illegal, carefully constructed, manipulative, but technically valid. But that didn't mean I had to follow through. The inheritance? It would still come, eventually, just not under their timeline. So I made a choice. I waited. Ripple effects. Daniel lost more than he expected. No wedding, no payout. And a reputation that didn't survive the rumors. My mom? She lost control over the situation, over me, and slowly, over everything else. Because the one thing she didn't plan for was me saying no. Time skip. Months later. I turned 23 quietly. No party. No big moment. Just a normal day. Except it wasn't. Because that was the day everything finalized. The inheritance transferred fully into my name. No conditions left. No dependencies. No strings. For the first time, everything was mine. I was sitting in a small apartment. Nothing fancy, just quiet, simple, mine. And I remember thinking about that night, the door, the moment everything broke. At the time, it felt like the worst thing that could happen, but it wasn't. Because if I hadn't opened that door, I would have walked down that aisle, smiled, said yes, signed everything, and lived inside something that was never real. I leaned back in my chair, staring out the window. No anger, no regret, just clarity. Because in the end, I didn't lose a fiancé, I didn't lose a wedding, I lost an illusion. And what I gained was something no one could arrange for me, a life that was finally my own.